Welcome back to a big Carnage House episode. I'm lucky to have Michael Dello-Iacovo in the house to talk with me about all things animal justice. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Dougal. It's great to be here.
Now, Michael, you're head of the youth wing of the Animal Justice Party, who've been quite successful at the recent elections. Now, I don't know too much about the party, so why don't you give me the kind of pitch, what the Animal Justice Party is about, and the recent election success?
Sure. So the Animal Justice Party formed in 2011, and it formed because of a frustration of people from a range of different parties and backgrounds that there just wasn't enough consideration for animals in politics. Which I think is true even now, unfortunately, that most laws are changed and made without considering the animals that it affects. They're usually mostly concerned on how it affects humans. So the Animal Justice Party exists to give a voice to animals in Parliament and to be there to represent them. So for the recent elections, we were able to increase our representation in Parliament from 1 to 2 members in New South Wales. In last year in the Victorian state election, we got our first representative there. So now we have 3 across the country. And then in the federal election a few weeks ago, we unfortunately, I think the votes are still being counted, but it looks like we won't get an upper house seat there, unfortunately. But we were able to increase our vote most places across the country, so that's really good. Especially since the large number of minor parties running in this election, which makes it easy for the voices of small parties to be drowned out. I think the fact that we still did well was good, and we increased our supporter base, so I think we'll continue to increase and improve on that next time.
Okay, fantastic. I want to get into some of those meaty issues about animal justice with you. But first I want to talk a little bit about you, who you are and how you got involved in the Animal Justice Party. Now, you mentioned to me before you're doing a PhD in space science, which is impressive but quite different from your animal justice. Well, I don't know, would you say that your PhD is taking up most of your time, or your animal justice stuff, or how does your life get divided right now?
Yeah, well, for the last 5 or so months I've taken time off my PhD to focus on first the New South Wales state election and the federal election, which was definitely needed because that took up pretty much most of my time in that period. I've started my PhD again this week, so now I'm trying to find that new balance between Animal Justice Party work and PhD work. I guess you could say, well, at the moment it's probably 2/3 PhD and 1/3 Animal Justice Party.
So what do you do on what does head of the youth wing mean for Animal Justice Party?
Sure. Well, we founded the youth wing last year, and it's the first youth wing for an animal party in the Southern Hemisphere, which is, I think, pretty cool. So we run events by young people for young people. It's really about giving young people a voice and a space to be active in the party. We run workshops to help people improve political advocacy skills, their speaking skills, so on.
Right.
Yeah, give them an opportunity to have a say in what happens in the party and what issues we focus on, and also a good opportunity to help out. So we had opportunities for helping out elections for young people, and by young people I mean any age up to about 30. 30 is the youth wing age limit.
That's when you become middle age.
That's it. So we're still getting going. We're hoping to. At the moment we only have the youth wing in New South Wales, and we're hoping to expand that across the country as well.
Okay, so what does an event look like? Like, what might be an example of event that you put on for the youth?
Sure. A few months ago we had Emma Hurst, who at the time was not elected. Yeah, shout out to Emma.
She got elected.
She was elected, which is awesome. But at the time she wasn't elected, but she came and gave us a talk about why political advocacy is important for animals, why people should be involved in political advocacy to help animals. And that got a very positive reception. A lot of young people came along to see that. And I guess some other examples of events. In a few weeks' time, we're going to be volunteering at a dog rescue shelter, just helping them out. It's just, sometimes with animal advocacy, you get caught up in very abstract things. It's nice to kind of get back to actually helping the animals personally sometimes. So we're going to be doing that. Just an opportunity for about 15 of our youth wing members to go and help out some dogs hands-on.
Okay, fantastic. Now, I do like that you are actually going and doing some stuff with the animals. I feel like that. I don't know. I just like that is good.
Yeah.
Now, I assume that you said that's for your youth wing members. Now, I assume that if any of the listeners wanted to go and help out, is that an exclusive thing for your youth wing members, or can they do something else?
Yeah, this one is unfortunately exclusive for our youth wing members. Most of our events are open to everybody, but just because of limited numbers for this one.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, no problem. I'm sure if there's any events in the future, we'll be able to link them,
Awesome.
share them around. So let's talk about some of the issues that the Animal Justice Party wants to have a look at. Now, I don't know, because you have 2 members in the New South Wales Parliament and 1 in Victoria. Well, the first thing I want to ask is what's the kind of realistic contribution in Parliament in like laws for a kind of minor party? What type of things can you look at doing?
Yeah, so there's a few different things I want to talk about here. So first is this idea of the balance of power, which some of your listeners may be aware of. It's where, so if you have 1 or 2 seats in the upper house, let's say, because the major party will rarely form a majority on their own in the upper house, to get their bills passed, they need to work with some other smaller parties to make arrangements to get their bills passed. So they might come to us and they might say, look, we need 1 or 2 more votes on our bill. Can you help us out? And then we'd say, well, okay, but what will you do for animals, or what will you do for the environment for us to consider your bill? And that's something we're always doing, looking for opportunities to work together on different issues. And we actually have managed to get, through this arrangement, we managed to get a change in the code of practice to help animals in experimentation in New South Wales, which was our right to release bill. So we can realistically make change even with a small number of people elected. And the other thing I want to talk about is our members have recently been elected, Mark Pearson and Emma Hurst, to a number of different committees, which are where more work can be done in Parliament. So they were elected to, I believe, the Committee on Health, Committee on Environment, and Committee on Animal Welfare. So that's 3 different committees that they're working on directly to influence law and encourage the other politicians to think about animals and how laws change affects them.
Okay. Well, do you want to give us what's this code of practice for scientific experiments? What's that about?
Sure. So the right to release bill was proposed to back up a little bit, there are about 10 million animals experimented on in Australia each year, and about 5 million of those are in New South Wales alone. And we're talking about things like testing for medical purposes. Now, about 1,500 of these are cats and dogs in New South Wales, if I'm not mistaken. So our bill mandate, now what happens is after about 10 years, or however long the animals are tested on for cats and dogs in particular, they are usually euthanized, and that's kind of just the standard, or at least it was. Now, we knew that most of these cats and dogs, and probably most of the animals in the testing industry, they're healthy at the end of that time, mostly. They've had various tests on them, some very invasive, some less so, but they're usually capable of living out the rest of their life. So we just said, why don't we change this so that these animals have to be given a chance to be rescued, to be rehomed, to live a good life after that. And I don't think there's any reason why they can't. So it was just a very small change, and it only affects, unfortunately, at the moment, cats and dogs. But that is 1,500 cats and dogs each year who will be given the chance to have a new life.
Well, that's pretty good. That's a good start.
Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot of people who are happy with that. I can't imagine why you might not be. But did you meet any resistance to that bill?
We did.
And what was the resistance about?
Yeah, we did. Well, some of the resistance was from the testing industry itself. And actually, one comment that was made to us was, you can't do that. If everyone sees that the animals are actually healthy, that will just change the whole perception of the animal testing industry.
Right.
And I think that's exactly right. People see these animals, and you say to them, "Oh, this dog was tested on for 10 years," and people just it puts a face to the issue, and I think it really shocks people, and people are horrified to know that we do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what when it's 1,500 cats and dogs, what's the majority type of animal that gets tested on? People might maybe have like some idea it's a hamster. What are the usual animals that get tested?
Mostly it's mice, rats, and fish. Fish probably surprising to some people. Mice and rats are the typical ones you think of. But fish more recently because they have some traits that are more similar to humans. But I just want to say that you ask someone why do we test on animals, and we say, oh, because they're like us, they have similar properties to us. But then you ask them, why is it okay to test on animals and not humans? And they say, well, then because they're not like us. I think there's a fundamental inconsistency there. And when there's so many alternatives like computer modeling, like testing on human cells, which is more accurate and more consistent, because a lot of products, you test them on animals and it looks like they're okay, and then you test them on they apply them to humans, and actually, because we have different physiologies, it just doesn't work. And there have been cases where thousands of humans have gotten sick because a new product has been rolled out, medical product. It was tested on animals and we thought it was great, and then turns out we just have different physiologies, and it caused a lot of issues. So yeah, when there's a lot of different alternatives, I don't think we should be testing.
Okay, so we would be looking for a total ban on animal testing?
So that is our ultimate goal, and we acknowledge that the road to that is probably long, which is why we're open to these kind of more stepwise changes. But yes, that's definitely our ultimate goal.
Okay. And so I don't know anything about medical or space, or I don't really know much about anything, to be quite honest.
I'm sure it's not true.
my gut feeling is that there would have been some helpful to humans testing on animals. Now, whether that's legitimate or not, and whether that should be something that we don't do anyway. But are you saying you think there's more effective ways to test like a new medical product or whatever it is that currently gets tested on animals? Do you think there's better alternatives?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%, yeah. And I think you can say, we've learned some things from testing on animals that may have helped us, but again, it's about considering, it's about weighing the effects on the animals versus the humans. We can't just think about our ethics and our laws in terms of how it affects humans. There might be some benefits to humans, but if it causes thousands of animals to be tested on, I don't think that's worth it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess here's an interesting question, and I guess might go a bit deeper into the Animal Justice Party. Is like, if to what extent is the life and safety of the animals equivalent or as important as the life and safety of humans? And where would you guys put different animals higher up? Because you would have probably seen that meme going around Facebook where they have like the pigs and the sheep and the cow and then the horse and like the elephant. It's like, where's the line? And they say, well, it's between the cow and the horse.
I've seen that.
Right? Where it obviously doesn't make sense to put a line there, but we kind of do. Or at least a lot of people kind of do. Do you guys have a feeling where that line might be, or would you just take the line out completely?
So this is my personal view, is that the only morally relevant trait is that, of when we consider why do we care about animals and why not care about plants or something, it's because animals can suffer. And I think any animal that can suffer has, an interest in not suffering, and then we should try and reduce that suffering. So I think we should care about all animals, the insects, and everything that can suffer. The question is, how much do we care about them different amounts? Now, I'm not going to say that I think an ant's life is worth a human's life. I think that doesn't make sense. But I think we should definitely give equal consideration to all living beings in terms of how much they can suffer, how much all of those kind of traits that I think are relevant. Now whether a pig, let's say, is worth one human or 10 pigs are worth a human, I think either way, if we were being true to ourselves and true to the values that most people actually have, we wouldn't be running a world like we are right now. Even if it's 10 pigs are worth one human, I don't think it wouldn't make sense to do what we do to them in farms. It wouldn't make sense to do what we do to animals in animal testing. So,
okay, well, let's talk about it. I'm quite interested in that point. and I want to maybe come back to this point of suffering and how it might relate to some other non-animal, some human issues later on. But let's talk about the farming. Let's talk about farming.
Sure. Yeah.
So is it? Firstly, is a personal interest question. Are most of the people in the Animal Justice Party vegan or vegetarian?
It is a good question. I don't know off the top of my head how many of our members are vegan or vegetarian. I would dare say it's a large number, but we're certainly not. You certainly don't have to be a vegan or vegetarian to be a member of the party. At the moment, we do say that to be a candidate for an election or to be on a committee, you do have to be vegan, and that's just because if we're going to be in Parliament speaking on behalf of animals, then we kind of need to make sure our actions are aligned with what we say. But to be a member and to be involved, we have a lot of people who help us, and they're very concerned about the treatment of animals, but aren't necessarily vegan themselves. So we're open to
Okay, so let's talk about farming. Do you want to say anything in general about farming and like my gut feeling is if we elevate how we think of animals and like in terms of their value of life, then you'd have to say probably farming overall isn't very good. Is that your position?
Yes, and I think anyone would say that if they accepted that, because you just look at how the status quo of how animals are treated in farms, even just in Australia, where people think we have very good welfare conditions, maybe better than some countries, but it's not as good as people think. When people think of a farmed animal in Australia, they probably think of like a cow in a nice paddock or something. That's actually a very small percentage of the animals that are farmed in Australia. But it's the image we have because the other animals have very little visibility. So actually, most animals farmed in Australia are chickens farmed in intensive operations. So in cages, in these in battery cages where they have very little room to move, sometimes multiple chickens in the cage. That's one of the issues we're trying to change in New South Wales law to ban that practice. So I think, even if we're only considering the welfare of the animals and the interests of the animals, farming, at least the way we're doing it now, doesn't make sense. But then also you look at the environmental impacts and how that affects us and also animals. Now, when people talk about climate change, they usually talk about fossil fuels or transport. I think these are both absolutely important. But what people want to realize is arguably the leading cause of climate change is animal agriculture in Australia. So once you consider the emissions, once you consider the deforestation, so for example, 93% of deforestation in Queensland has been from animal agriculture historically, 93%. So it's just, I think when we focus on fossil fuels and transport for climate change, again, I think that's important, but I think the focus there is wrong. I think we should be focusing more on animal agriculture, especially considering it's such a neglected issue. Everyone knows about fossil fuels, everyone knows about transport, but no one thinks about the animals and the impact of the environment. Yeah.
I know in the Green New Deal, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has talked about the cows. But I want to continue on this issue of farming for a little bit more. Now, farming does feed a lot of people.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I think it was a couple of years ago, it was actually, I think, obesity overtook anorexia as the leading cause of health problems in the world. And that's kind of a nice achievement for the human race. But the way it's been explained to me sometimes, and I'd like to get your opinion on it, is that the moral judgment which we place on farming and animal agriculture is contingent on the alternative kind of food sources we can get, right? So if we were hunter-gatherers, it wouldn't be a problem if we were to go and kill a cow so we could eat the cow. But the argument I've heard is that, well, because we have alternative food sources, we can do things differently, then that means that killing the cow then becomes unnecessary and maybe bad. Now, I'm still a meat eater. I am kind of intellectually sympathetic to the animal argument, and maybe if I was a better man, I might change. But happy to have that discussion. But do you think that for like countries that aren't like Australia, that let's say you go to somewhere like Laos, where my uncle who's a farmer just went to Laos and was helping them, teaching them like farming practices, how to better maintain like a flock, how to fight diseases and stuff like this. Do you think it's a different moral question about farming for them than it would be for Australians?
Yeah, so first I'll say I agree with what you said in that if we had to eat animal products to survive, it would be a very different question. But at the base level, we don't need to do it for health reasons if we have alternatives. And in fact, it's actually arguably healthier if we avoid things like red meat, processed meat, eggs, and so on. But it does get trickier in countries where they're perhaps more reliant on it. But I will push back on that a little bit because I want to say that animal agriculture is actually a really inefficient way of farming. So it takes something like 9 calories of grain or feedstock to produce 1 calorie of like animal product, whether that's, I think that's the most efficient conversion, which I think it might be chickens because they've been bred to grow faster. But if you look at other animal products like beef, it's maybe 15 calories per calorie. So it's very inefficient in that sense. It also uses a lot of water. It uses a lot of land. I think there will be you'll get some cases where it might be more efficient, where say they're grazing in like land that can't be used to grow any crops or anything like that. But even in developing nations, a lot of land is used to grow crops solely for the production of animal products. And so I do just want to push back a little bit because I think if we were really looking at what type of farming should these people be doing to benefit the people themselves the most, I think it actually would be, in most cases, not animal products. I think it would be different crops like corn, soy, and that kind of thing.
Okay, so why do you think, if that's the most efficient type, why do you think that animal agriculture might still be an option that they use? Why wouldn't they have converted already to soy and corn and things like that?
Why do they use it now?
Yeah.
So one part of it, I mean, it's I guess for a subsistence farmer, it could be a more profitable option for them to sell a crop, like for them to grow a crop and instead of eating it, to sell it to someone else to farm animal products with it. But also because I don't know about developing nations, but I know that in Australia, in the US, we have a lot of subsidies that go into animal products, animal farming, because the lobbies of the industries are quite powerful. So it is a little bit skewed. I mean, when you go and buy a hamburger for $2 or whatever it is, like that's if it wasn't for the subsidies, it would cost more. If you consider the negative externalities like the environmental impact, it would cost more again. So yeah, I think even where we do farm it today, because maybe because of tradition, people have a desire to want to eat animal products. I think that if we could turn some of these levers and start maybe shifting some of the subsidies from animal products to plant-based farming, or we talk about a carbon tax, but the original carbon tax in Australia, or carbon price, whatever you want to call it, it just ignored the animal agriculture industry, the agriculture industry in general. And I think if we started to look at the negative externalities like the environmental impact, and we taxed the industry accordingly, I think that you would just see people shifting what they farm on their own and what they consume on their own. At least more so than today. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. Now, of course, if you were to take that position on farming with the animals, then the economics wouldn't be that important because you'd have that moral obligation first. But do you give any consideration to the economics of leaving a beef or agriculture industry behind? Or if you were to implement like alternative farming practices that might mean we don't have the same beef industry or animal agriculture industry in Australia, do you give any? How do you think you might go about doing that? Because there's probably a lot of people who are dependent on it at this point.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend it's going to be an easy transition or a quick transition. You're right, there are a lot of farmers who are dependent on the animal agriculture industry. So, I mean, we are looking into how we can transition. We want to help farmers as well because, you know, first I want to say we don't dislike farmers. We don't, you know, we don't want to blame people who, you know, consume animal products or anything like that. It is just the society that we are in, and that's how it is. And so it's, I guess, if you want to point the blame, we'd rather, you know, focus on society, changing society. So we want to help farmers transition where they can from animal farming to plant-based farming. So we're looking at things like subsidies for changing, more generally, like I said, some kind of like tax and subsidy scheme that, you know, based on like what we have for fossil fuels, we tax that, or we want to tax that, and then we want to subsidize, say, renewable energy. I think it's the same thing. We want to do the same thing. So we can look at the fossil fuel to renewables transition is a good example because we can do a lot of the same things. I do find it interesting that in the I don't want to generalize too much, but just generally, I do feel like when people talk about transitioning from coal to renewables, no one seems to worry about the coal miner's job. But when you talk about transitioning from animal farming to plant-based farming, suddenly it's a big issue. Sorry, I'm not pointing the finger at you. I just say, like, in general, I just find that interesting. So I think we can just do the same thing that we did for that transition. We can look at the same kinds of things to help them.
Sure. No, I get that. I think there is, although I think there is a significant discussion going on, particularly with the Adani coal mine, about the jobs that would bring into Adani.
Yeah.
But regardless, I concede that point. I think, you know, sometimes you do get a mismatch and it unfairly will bite you.
Yeah.
Now, to talk about a few more issues, why don't you give me the pitch? So, live exports, right? What's the pitch for banning the ban on live exports?
Yeah. Yeah. So our position on live export is we just want to end the industry entirely. We want a complete ban. And one of the main points there is we've seen a lot of undercover footage and whistleblowers from the industry come out and reveal footage of the industry, what happens to these animals on ships, and it's so hard to have decent living conditions for animals when the economics kind of dictates that you pack them on that ship and you cut corners on welfare. They're not really air conditioned. These animals are sometimes like cooking to death, basically, especially in like the summer months. But just in general, I think we've seen over and over again just these gross breaches of what anyone would consider okay for animals. So we just want to end that industry entirely. Talking about the jobs there, I guess it's 3.7% of our agricultural exports are live export, which is relatively small. So we do want to look at what kind of industries can we use to replace that. So things like exporting plant-based farming products or other exports entirely, and help promote those industries. But it is a very small percentage, and I think most Australians want to see an end to that just because they don't want to have a part in that industry. I think that's basically
okay, good. Live exports was one of the things I wanted to talk about. I did send a message to a few of my farming buddies and ask them what they thought about it.
Yeah.
I'll just raise a couple of points. If you want to respond,
sure.
You can. One is that the meat is healthier if the animal's slaughtered in the region where it's going to be consumed because it has a longer shelf life. It doesn't start. I don't know if that's assuming that we want to reduce the amount of meat eating. I mean, I don't know if that's a strong point, but this is an interesting one, which is that many of the countries that are importing our livestock would switch to less ethically driven exporters, such as Sudan, Somalia, and Iran, if we were to end live exporting from Australia. Is that something you guys... Is that something you consider? I don't even know if it's a moral thing, because if we want to look after what we do ourselves, does that mean we have a stake in what other countries do? I don't know, but it might affect the animals' welfare overall.
Sure. No, it's an interesting point. I don't know. I mean, I can see that is a possibility. I don't know. I don't know how strong their live export industries would be. Say, if we stopped live exporting, what other countries would do, I actually don't know. Maybe I have to look into that some more. But I guess it is just about setting an example. Like, we don't want to. I would think that most Australians don't want to be a part of this industry, and so it's about not being complicit in the industry at all. And maybe we can encourage, we can, if we try to promote other products, maybe we can encourage other countries to do the same as well.
Yeah, well, I did see on your website when I was looking at your policies and your positions and stuff, that you referred to, I think, some report into live exports, which identified the problem of the animals cooking, particularly in the summer months in these hot ships. And I think that, I don't know if the report said maybe you should look at banning particularly the summer months. Do you guys see it as, I know you guys want to ban the whole practice, but assuming that it's probably going to be very difficult to ban the whole practice, would you look at like banning the hotter months as like a first step? Is that what you'd like to do?
Sure. I mean, we'd be open to that. Like I said, we're open to stepwise change to help animals where we can. We've had a number of bans in the past that are kind of temporary or half. Like I think recently we had a ban on sheep live export in the summer months, and we get a lot of these kind of, I guess you can call them like half measures, and then often they will be overturned after a year when kind of the attention has died down. So
right.
I guess that would be one of my main pushbacks on that, why we want to still push for a total ban. And the other thing is, I don't actually know if it's that difficult. We had Labor on board with that as well, and the Greens have been on board with that. So if we had a different result in the last election, I think we actually could have seen that change.
Okay.
I think, that's realistically that's
and it is
still possible.
To clear it up. So you guys work in the Senate, right? And so when you get stuff passed, you work with major parties. Do you usually find yourself working with Labor or Liberal, or does it not really matter?
We've worked with both. Yeah, we're happy to work with whichever party wants to talk about animal issues or the environment. Yeah, we've definitely worked with both. We've worked with Greens. We've worked with a number of other small parties. So yeah, I think we're open to working with any party that is open to working with us. Yeah. Okay,
and on the we'll do a couple more animal issues because then. I do kind of want to talk a little bit at the end about the human issues.
Yep.
Now, on killing kangaroos on farms, or maybe off farms, but I guess mainly on farms is the issue. Kangaroos are often seen as a pest. My buddy says they cost the agricultural sector $90 million a year through destruction of infrastructure, fences, blah blah blah. He says the management of total grazing pressure, which is a thing in farming, apparently, which is, he says, essential for maintaining plant biodiversity, can get changed by kangaroos. So while you can monitor the number of cattle and sheep, it's harder to control kangaroo numbers, kind of grazing. And the only tool available is the culling. The only tool available is to kind of shoot them. Now, I can have a good guess what your position on this is going to be, but I want you to give it to me anyway.
Okay, so lots of things to talk about here. First, the idea that kangaroos are a pest, I think, is really interesting because kangaroos, they're a native animal to Australia. And I can't really think of any other native animal, happy for you to correct me or just be wrong on this, but I can't think of any other native animal that we would call a pest. Usually when we talk about pests, which I don't like that term anyway, but we talk about an introduced species. But kangaroos have been here longer than humans have. So, yeah, I don't know if we can really call them a pest. And, they talk about them being overpopulated. Personally, I mean, from what I've seen of the numbers, I would contest that they are overpopulated. I think their numbers are actually decreasing. But just the idea that they can be overpopulated, like I don't think we'd call any other native animal, like overpopulated. But also, the idea that then we have to cull them or to slaughter them to try and reduce their numbers. I don't think that that's a long-term viable solution. Culling has never been a long-term solution to population numbers of animals. It will reduce their population size temporarily, but then in a few years' time, because the population has a stable point. It's based on the long-term average is based on other factors like the amount of available food and water and land and so on. So your population is just going to increase back to that size, and you're going to cull them again a few years down the line. What I think is a more long-term viable solution, I don't know if this has been tested on kangaroos, trialed on kangaroos, but what we've seen this for I think horses in the US and some other animals across the world. They've been testing contraceptive methods. So, for example, putting like a contraceptive in food pellets and dropping food pellets for a region. The animals eat that. It causes a number of them, percentage of them, to become sterile. They give birth to less young, and that actually is a more long-term solution because that does reduce the long-term average population size. And I think we should be looking at these alternatives. That for horses, that's been shown to be cost-effective, about as cost-effective. It's much more humane. And then I guess to carry on that point, I find for what I've seen from the kangaroo hunting industry in Australia, it's exceptionally cruel. The kangaroos are hunted at night, almost always. They're often shot and not killed in one shot. They have to be hit several times sometimes. Or they might get hit and run off. And I mean I don't want to go into too much graphic detail, but the code of practice itself that dictates what is okay to do to kangaroos, what is recommended. I mean, what the way they recommend killing joeys is to just bash them across the head. If you find a joey in a mother's pouch, and it's like, what do you do if you find one? Bash them across the head. That's what the code of practice says. So I don't think that it's a particularly humane industry, even as far as animal killing goes. But yeah, I think, and then people will talk about the health risks. So a number of countries, Russia, I think maybe California, and a few other countries are starting to ban kangaroo meat imports, because what happens is when you kill a kangaroo, say if you kill it at the start of the night, it goes in the back of this truck. It's usually an open ute. They're kind of just hung up there. You're driving along, this truck is driving along a dusty road all night, killing more kangaroos. And then at the end of the night, some 8 to 10 hours later, they will go and put them in a refrigeration unit. But that's a long time for an animal to be dead on the back of a dusty truck without refrigeration. So it's not particularly humane, and they've done tests on kangaroo meat, and there are a lot of health issues. Things like E. coli and other things they find in there. And then the other point that was made about the environmental impacts, kangaroos are significantly less environmentally damaging than cattle, and so I can perfectly understand why an animal farmer would be concerned about the environmental impact of kangaroos, but considering that their livestock are causing more of an environmental impact, I don't know. I find that the focus is a little bit off. That if we really cared about the environment, or if we really cared about the animals, I think we'd be going about it a different way.
Well, I think you made some really good points. Well thought out, well argued points. And one of the things we love to do on the channel is be open-minded. And so I'd love you guys to really consider what Michael's saying. I'm considering it. I think he made some great points. I want to do one more. I want to do. Okay. Well, let's talk about climate change.
Sure.
Unless you want to give a quick 30 seconds about Greyhound Racing as well.
Yeah, I can do that. So Greyhound Racing is it's still legal in New South Wales. We had a few years ago we almost had a ban, and then it was reverted. Look, just very very quickly on Greyhound Racing. These animals they're bred for a job. They're bred to race, and then when they're no longer producing a profit, when they're no longer running fast, or when they don't want to run anymore, they're usually just euthanized. And so even if we forget the like live baiting, where sometimes rabbits are tied to a I forget the name for it, but they're tied
to
a
thing that spins around.
That's
the
right.
Dogs chase,
and the dogs chase, and they kill the rabbit. So I mean, that's awful, and that's the like Greyhound Racing industry claims that they try to clamp down on that, but it still happens. So letting aside that, I think just the fact that these greyhounds they're bred and raised for a purpose, and then when they finish that purpose, they're discarded. And I just think that's wrong. And I think I'm all for mutually beneficial relationships between humans and animals, like having companion animals and so on. But to breed them just to race them and then kill them, I don't think makes any sense.
Okay, very nice. Okay, climate change.
Yep.
Climate change. Now, there have been some climate skeptics on the show. I don't know that much at all about the science, or about the economics of it either. But that being said, there's some people who thought they did, who've come on. Now, my gut feeling is when we talk about climate change, we're just going to have to, at least today, assume that it's a thing and that we can influence it. But maybe you being a science person as well, you might be able to know a little bit about the science of climate change. But anyway, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Tell us about climate change and what we need to do about it. And what the agriculture industry needs to do. Okay,
so I could talk about the science, but I guess we'll just assume that climate change is real and it's something we can do something about. So, all right, I mentioned before that animal agriculture is a major cause of climate change. There's a lot of things, and I think just historically in general, we haven't done anywhere near as much as we should have about that. I am a little bit heartened in that in the last 5 years, I've seen a big shift in the position of the major parties and how they view climate change. It's historically just been something that, say, the Greens have been pushing, or some independents, and not getting a lot of traction on. But Labor's come on board with a lot of really good environmental policies, and so I do take heart from that. I think we're seeing a slow shift in how environmental issues are being considered by Australian politics. But again, I mean, it took that long to get the major parties on board with fossil fuels and transitioning to clean energy. I'm just worried that it's going to take just as long, if not longer, to get them on board with other industries like animal agriculture, and to start thinking about that. I've had conversations with at least 2 Labor ministers, one state, one federal, and asked them about animal agriculture. And I said, well, you talk about climate change, which is great, but do you ever consider animal agriculture? And they just flat out said no. And that's worrying for me. So I would love to at least see that conversation start, and to start talking about it in federal parliament, which would have been great if we had at least one senator elected in federal parliament, because then we could be there to ask questions of the ministers and say, why are we not talking about animal agriculture, or why are we just not doing more on climate change in general? Was there something in particular you wanted to talk about?
No, well, I guess it would be to reduce the emissions, I guess, from animals.
Sure.
I guess the one that most people might know would be the methane from the cows. What other things would you say animal agriculture needs to work on? Yeah,
that's a part of it. Deforestation, I think, is a big one. I think people don't realise how much so the demand for animal products in Australia is still increasing. So you have 2 choices. They're either grazing, which actually requires more land use than grain-fed animals. So that means more deforestation, or that you feed them with grain. And then you have to clear forest to make room for feeding them, to grow crops to feed them. So either way, it's you can't really have an increase in animal product demand without an increase in deforestation. And that's a lot of emissions just from the carbon stored in the trees that's released to the atmosphere. So what can the industry improve on? I mean, of course, I'm going to say I think we should be reducing animal product demand, but something like I said, a carbon tax that actually includes the agriculture industry, I think would be good. It would incentivize, even if an animal farmer doesn't want to transition to a different industry, it would still incentivize them to try and look at what they can do to reduce the emissions in that industry. And just like we've seen some innovation in the fossil fuel industry, they were working on reducing their emissions. I think we'd start to see the same innovation in the farming industry, which would be great for the environment. It just needs that kind of incentive with either subsidies or taxes to kind of get that going.
Okay. Now, very happy with that I think we might get some pushback from the listeners in the comment section, which I look forward to. If there's any climate skeptics or animal agriculture, we want to hear what you got to say. Now, I think we did a pretty good job on the animal issues, and that's what the Animal Justice Party is mainly about. Now, your party, on the website at least, does have a position on some of the more mainstream human issues, and it seems like you guys are kind of aligned with more Labor Greens, at least on social policy and stuff like that. Would you say that's a fair characterisation or not?
I think that's fair. I think the policies that we have on more human issues, I think probably does align with them more. Yeah.
Okay. Now there was one thing that came to mind when you were talking about we should be protecting like the animals, like who can kind of feel pain. And I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to. You might even be able to guess what's coming. There's been a big debate, particularly in America recently, about abortion. Some people call them fetuses. Some people call them unborn children. And that's kind of a thing. We know at some stage, at least during the pregnancy, that the baby can feel pain. Do you guys does that translate across to like fetuses or unborn babies, this kind of trying to extend civil rights and stuff like that, or not really?
So I'll give you the party position and then my personal position. So we don't currently have a policy on abortion in the Animal Justice Party. So I'll say as well, I mean, we have, so all of our, I guess, quote unquote policies are on animal issues. What we have for human issues are position statements. So we have a position statement for some major topical issues, but we have that distinction at the moment, at least, just to try to focus on our core issue and the core reason that we exist, which is for the non-humans. But absolutely, I mean, we want to, our members still have to vote on every issue, every bill that comes across Parliament. So what I can say is that our first member in New South Wales, Mark Pearson, has spoken in defence of early stage abortion and supports that. My personal position would be the same. I think what you said is right. There is a point in pregnancy where we're sure up until that point that we're sure at least that the child is the fetus is not sentient. And does not feel pain. And going back to what I said before, I think pain is kind of the pain and suffering and ability to feel joy and happiness and all that is kind of the main morally relevant trait. And so for me personally, at least, I would be happy to support abortion. It's a decision made by the mother and perhaps even the father, and in consultation with their doctor. As long as it's early stage, I would be happy to support that. Then it gets more complicated, and then I think it would have to be like someone's life would have to be at risk, like the mother's life would have to be at risk, or something to consider like a mid or late stage abortion. But that's my personal position.
Okay. Now I don't know if there's any more human issues that you want to talk about. I just I just thought about that one because I thought it might relate. But what I would like is, is there anything people can do every day that might make a bit more animal friendly world? And also, if you wanted to kind of give a short pitch on maybe I don't know if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, but what's the pitch to the non-vegans and non-vegetarians out there?
Yeah, okay, so I am vegan. I've been vegan for about 4.5 years now. My pitch, well, first I'll say that I used to almost only eat animal products. I obviously wasn't born vegan. Few people are, but I, up until about, I think 20, I hated fruit, I hated vegetables, and I just pretty much only ate meat, dairy, eggs. So I think if I can change, I think anyone can. And I have to say, I gave it a go. At first I tried vegetarian, and I thought, it would be really hard. I'll go do it for a week, see how I go. I just never stopped. And then 2 years later, I thought, well, vegan, that's a bit too hard, but I'll give it a go for a week, and I just never stopped. So it is easier, I think, than people think it is. It does sound really hard at first, but most people I've met who have just tried it have actually been really surprised and said, "Wow, actually, it is easy." But I guess my pitch would be, we've spoken about, I think, most of the issues. It's obviously better for the animals, but it's better for the environment. It's most likely better for our health as well, as long as you're making sure you get the right nutrients. But people don't make sure they get often they don't make sure they get the right nutrients on a non-vegan diet. So you have to do the same things. And just on average, vegans have higher blood protein concentration. They have longer life expectancy and a number of other things, lower rates of cancer, type 2 diabetes, obesity. So definitely consider it, even if you're anything about it for the health benefits. But if you want to give it a go, I would suggest there is a good website called 10 Weeks to Vegan, which you can sign up for with your email, and they'll send you every 1 week. They'll send you like tips on cutting out one product. So you cut out one product a week for every 10 weeks. It gives you like recipes and ideas and nutrition information. Or try like Vegan Mondays or something and just give it a go. And I think you will be pleasantly surprised. I think for most people at least, it's easier than they thought it would be.
Okay, beautiful. Now, where can people find the Animal Justice Party? I don't know if you want people to find you in particular. They might have liked what you said, might want to hear more what you got to say. So give us, where can we find either you or the Animal Justice Party or both?
Sure. So the Animal Justice Party website is animaljusticeparty.org, or our New South Wales website is nsw.animaljusticeparty.org. You can find information about our policies there, our youth wing, and some other stuff. If people want to find out more about my work in particular, I might have my own personal website, michaeldello.com, where I talk about Animal Justice Party stuff as well. But also some, I talk about ethics and science and some other stuff. Or I'm on my official party page is on Facebook, which I think if you just search Michael Dello-Iacovo, you should be able to find.
Well, regardless, we'll throw all the links in the description. Cool. So if you want to have a look down there, you'll be able to find Michael. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. If you liked what you saw today, make sure to let us know, like, comment, subscribe. I'm that guy who says that now on the YouTube, but feel free to do it. If you really enjoyed it and want to take the support one step further, feel free to check us out on Patreon. You can donate for as little as $1 a month. I really appreciate that. And all our patrons, or patrons, I don't know what the word is, who supported already. So thank you very much. Thanks to the Animal Justice Party. Love to have you on again. I thought it was very interesting. And I'd love to see what you guys get up to in the Parliament.
Thanks, Dougal.
I think that'll be interesting. But anyway, thanks for being with us and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Bye-bye.